Hi class, I wanted to talk through the week 5 assignment because there seemed to be a lot of problems with it. It's supposed to be an outline of your week 8 research proposal. And this means this is about research that you would plan to conduct. Now, obviously you're not going to conduct it because we don't have enough time to put this together at a level that would get IRB approval and you'd have time to conduct it. But you're supposed to write this as a proposal. Here's what I would do if I were going to do research. And so in your introduction, you want to include your problem statement. There's a problem out there in an area of interest that you have that needs to be solved. And so then you would have a brief statement of purpose, and the purpose is just on the segment of the research that you're going to do. And I'll give you an example in a minute. And then you have a rationale for conducting your study. It says your hypotheses and research questions. You need a research question that you're going to answer with your study, and then a hypothesis, your best guess of what will happen. Now that's if you use an experimental or quasi-experimental design. Or a correlational design. If you do survey research or a qualitative study, you won't have a hypothesis, you'll just have a research question. And then in your methods, that's going to be your research design. Research design is an important part of it. And then participants, procedures, what are you going to do? Or if you're going to use any materials or instruments or tests, what kind of data analysis do you think you would do with the data that you're getting? And then you want 3 articles to support your proposal, and your articles need to be peer-reviewed research articles. You can't just go on the internet and get an article that someone discussed something, and so it needs to be research-based. Now, to give you an example, I posted a link in an announcement on the interview with Dr. Beckert at the NIH, and she's the lead scientist on the COVID-19 vaccine research. Now, if you think about that, if you think about the COVID-19, there's a lot of implications to this research. For example, the implications are, well, it could end a world pandemic. It could end sheltering in for those of us here in the U.S. But what she did on her purpose, she broke the research down into what she called 3 phases, and it had to be done in steps that are possible to achieve in the research. And so the purpose described each step in her research. So for phase 1 of her research, it was simple. Her purpose was to discover if the vaccine is safe. That's it, and that's her research question. Research question is the vaccine safe to use? And her hypothesis was, yes, it would be safe. There'd be no harmful side effects to the vaccine. So then what they're going to do is a double-blind study. Remember we talked about researcher bias and participant bias. Well, a double-blind study is the researchers and the participants, neither one knows which participants get the vaccine and which ones get a placebo. And so then they administer placebos and vaccines, and then they study the people to see if there are any harmful side effects. So if the vaccine passes phase 1, then it moves into phase 2. The purpose for phase 2 would be to see, is the vaccine effective against COVID-19? Same thing, another double-blind study, because it's a clinical study, because this is medical research. And then they look to see, did the people who received the vaccine, were they protected, or did it fight against the COVID-19 virus? And then finally in phase 3, the purpose was to see, does the vaccine have prevention value? In other words, can it prevent someone from getting the COVID-19 virus? Once that's complete, then, and you'll see in the interview, she says they'll have the vaccine ready this fall for healthcare workers that are on the front line. And then their goal was to have mass production of this vaccine early spring next year for the general public. And that will be the beginning of getting back to normal. So let's take a quick look at week 8. These are the instructions for week 8. So notice statement of the problem. The difference is for week 5, you're doing an outline. For week 8, you're doing a narrative paper on a proposal. So you're going to state the problem. In other words, whatever your area of interest is, state the problem. Then you review the literature. In other words, what exists in the literature now related to this problem. Now, because we don't have a lot of time, this doesn't have to be exhaustive, but you should have several articles from the literature that talk about the problem, or even state the need to solve the problem. Then you have the purpose of the study, and you want to narrow that down to your study, just the portion that you're doing. You're not trying to save the world in one study. You have to do it in phases like Dr. Beckert did. And then list your hypothesis, your research question. Some of you listed multiple research questions, and every single one would be a separate study. So you just want a research question related to the study you're going to do. Define the terms in terms of how you will use them in your study. Assumptions, identify issues you assume to be true in order for your study to be valid. And then you get into the research, what's your research design, who would be the population, what would be the sample selected from that population, how will you carry that out? And so we've spent time talking about experimental design, quasi-experimental design. We're talking about correlation this week. We talked about survey studies. We also discussed qualitative case studies. So you need to select which research design is appropriate based upon your research question. Are you using instruments? If you are, you describe them. And same way, describe hypothesis if appropriate. In other words, if you're using experimental design or quasi-experimental design or correlational study. What would be your data analysis? In other words, based on the type of data you would generate, how would you analyze that? And then you do a discussion. And you write all of this in future tense because you're proposing research that would be conducted in the future. So I would select a sample. The sample would be X number from this population. Some of you actually wrote your outline in past tense because you were using a research article as a guide, but it looked more like a review of a research article. It's okay to have a research article that serves as a guide for you on this, but you want to write your proposal in future tense. And then towards the end, you can have a paragraph or two on the implications. Now, a lot of you put the implications in your purpose. You don't want to do that. Your purpose needs to drive your study. Implications you can write at the end. Based upon the results I expect to get, these might be the implications. So, for example, Dr. Beckert might say, based upon the results we expect from phase 1, 2, and 3, the implications are that she would have a vaccine ready in the fall for healthcare workers and in the spring for the general population. And then notice in your references, you're going to have 10 scholarly sources. Most of those will come in your literature review. You may have a reference related to your methodology or your research design. So anyway, I wanted to kind of talk through this with you before I send your papers back. So I hope you found this helpful. If you have questions, please ask.